Hi, this is Chris Simpson from the StageLeft Podcast. Welcome to a run of 4 episodes that we're dropping pretty much back to back. We've got Spike Edney, who's been in Queen for 35 years, who played Live Aid. He was on stage at Live Aid with Queen during that legendary performance. We've got Tim Staffel as well, who was the lead singer in Roger Taylor and Brian May's band, who decided to leave, and then Freddie Mercury stepped in, and that's a really interesting chat about his well-being around that, the envy he talks about over the years after he left that band, and seeing Queen go on to be who they became. A really interesting episode. We've got YC from Noel Gallagher's High Flying Birds, who literally is on stage right now supporting U2 in Auckland as I record this, and Fraser from one of the coolest bands on the planet, Jungle. Please press subscribe so you can listen to all episodes. Get in touch to say hello. We love to hear from you and where you're listening from. So go to our Facebook and Twitter pages. It's the StageLeft Podcast is what you want to be looking for. StageLeft is all one word. Also go onto our Instagram, where you'll see behind the scenes photos of every episode. We've a private dinner with Mo Pleasure of Michael Jackson's band in our lounge in London on the 22nd of December. It's a 5-course meal. You're going to be sat with Mo, and he's going to play a live performance right in front of you. And he's played with everyone, even at the White House at Barack Obama's request. So hope you enjoy the episode. Lifting the veil on the music industry by telling the stories of the unsung heroes behind the success. This podcast exists to provide free educational content for young musicians entering an increasingly complex industry by telling the stories of those with a unique vantage point. Go to thestageleftpodcast.com for all episodes featuring musicians who discuss in detail the recording, writing and performing processes with the likes of Elvis Presley, David Bowie, Michael Jackson, the Beatles, Fleetwood Mac, Nick Cave, Guns N' Roses, Oasis, Morrissey, Alanis Morissette, the 1975, Bob Dylan, the Stone Roses, Jeff Lynne and Kraftwerk. Today we're joined by multi-instrumentalist, programmer and music director Fraser MacColl. Amongst a host of eye-popping artists and bands, has been busy earning playing with Jungle and more recently Bombay Bicycle Club, and will share his experience on how to thrive in high-pressure environments from experiences playing the likes of Glastonbury, Jimmy Kimmel and later with Jules Holland. Fraser's also become accustomed to playing enormous shows with Russian legend Zemfira, yeah. There we go, including Moscow's Olympic Stadium and Madison Square Garden. So it's a pleasure to say that our guest today on the StageLeft Podcast is none other than Fraser MacColl. Thanks for joining us today, Fraser. How's it going?
I'm very well. How are you doing?
Yeah, pretty
hungover,
good.
Are you?
Yes, very hungover. We had one of our supper clubs last night, and so it's always a bit of a struggle the next morning, but there we go. You had a fun night last night as well, because you played Annie Mac's show, is that right?
I did.
Tell us about that.
Last night was my first radio performance with Bombay Bicycle Club.
Cool.
So that was their latest single, and then an album track from their latest record that has never been played before, and then a cover that I heard about half an hour before we went on.
Really? What was the cover?
Pure Shores by All Saints.
Oh, nice one.
Yeah.
And you had to learn it half an hour before?
Vocally, yeah. Jack had done a remix a few years ago, and
okay.
it was a version of that. So.
And what, you singing backing vocals?
Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay,
yeah,
cool,
and
cool.
a bit of keys. So.
And how do you, in a situation like that, that sounds pretty terrifying for most people, to have to learn something half an hour before it gets broadcast on, was it BBC Radio 1, right?
It was, yeah.
Fucking hell, man.
It's completely terrifying.
Talk us through that process. What did you do from the beginning to the live performance to make sure you nailed that?
We sat in a group, there were maybe 5 or 6 of us, just singing through the lyrics over and over again, and getting the rhythm and the lyric correct. Because in that environment, when it's, it's group vocal, but there's no track running or anything like that. So any sort of like phonetic, anything that you do that doesn't sound like everyone else is going to stand out. So yeah, it was just rolling it over and over and over.
And it came out all right? It sounded...
Yeah, I think so. I haven't listened to it yet, but seemingly everyone was really happy.
Good stuff. And where's the connection with Bombay Bicycle Club then? So are they guys you've known for a few years, or...?
Yeah, so Jamie, who plays guitar in the band, he's my cousin.
Oh, right.
And so... we're both the same age. So when we were growing up, there was a sort of north-south divide. They're from North London, and we live in South London. And it was starting bands at the same time. And they became a real benchmark for me as to what a band should be.
And what was that? What was the benchmark? Can you break that down? What was it that you wanted to...
They really captured at the time what it felt like to be, 15 and 16. But they were able to put that into songs which weren't angsty. They weren't... overly kind of sentimental, as in like, oh, I love you, I don't know how, and musically they presented it in a way that was just the guitar riffs, the way the instruments blended at the time, it was very unusual for an indie band. Although it was the era of indie bands, and it's 2 guitars, bass, and drums. The way Jack plays and the riffs he comes up with were just really unusual, and it really drew my ear at the time. And also they could fill a room of very excited people, and that was always something that it was like they tuned into a sort of they were able to unionize people, 16-year-old guys and girls that just wanted to go out and listen to music, and I was always so envious of that, because as a band, what more could you ask for?
And now you're playing in that band.
And now I'm playing in it.
And how does your role change the dynamic of the band?
Well, I don't.
Or enhance the dynamic of the band?
So I've taken over from a guy called Louis Bose.
Right.
And Louis has been in the band for the last 10 years. And, so a very established relationship with them all. And he's absolutely fucking hilarious. And so,
pressure's on you for the jokes.
I think it would be a mistake to try and be that. And just
Be yourself.
Be yourself. But yeah, so there's a long-standing relationship with Louis, and he carved out a job for himself, which is quite unusual. And taking over from that with a limited amount of time is quite a trial by fire. And it's playing instruments that I've never played before. And I've never even...
Such as?
Tambourine.
Classic.
Yeah, so it's flying by the seat of your pants, but with a challenge like that, you either thrive or you suck.
Yeah.
And as long as you don't suck too hard, then you...
Yeah.
So that sounds awful. As long as you don't suck too bad, then yeah.
Yeah.
But
it's interesting that you're adapting to kind of flying by the seats of your pants. So you said that to me before we recorded, so you hadn't gone through like a music education setting. So where, what are these skills, and how have you developed these skills from being at a young age? Are you all self-taught, and has there been any other jobs that you've done over those years that's kind of been transferable, those skills, into the music industry?
Well, I don't have any kind of formal music education. I didn't go to music school, or I don't have any certificates to show for it. My education a lot of it came from home to start with, because my parents are musicians, and so that was always a conversation around the dinner table. There was always guitars in the house to pick up. And
what did they do as musicians?
So my stepdad is a producer and session musician, musical director. My mum's a music manager.
Right, cool.
But my stepdad had the studio at home growing up, and a house full of guitars, and so there was always a point of reference. And that was a lot of learning by osmosis. When he wasn't there, taking his guitars and forgetting to put them back and getting in trouble for that, and it was just the atmosphere that you're in. There's always music around the house. There's always instruments to pick up, and so I was always really drawn by that.
Interestingly, that given you got both parents in the music industry, did either your stepdad or your mum kind of discourage you from going into the music industry in any way?
There was always, if you want to do this, you need to be able to do something else, like be a plumber.
Yeah.
Because, the instability financially, you can have fantastic periods for 3 or 4 years, but then you might not have anything for a year and a half. And that was something, experienced firsthand, watching them. For a long period, they were able to kind of keep things pretty level, but they were very, very enthusiastic about us doing it, very supportive, but they were always just quietly encouraging us that, if you're going to do this, then you need to figure out a way to subsidise yourself.
Now, your role because on your website you talk about being a music director, and you describe this from taking projects from the studio to stage and bringing an artist's vision to life. You're doing that at quite a young part of your career, I'd say. where did you learn to the skills? Because I'd like you to break down the components to that role, because there's a lot to it.
It's quite ambiguous, isn't
it? Yeah, and just kind of where the boundaries lie and where the accountability lies. I guess with the artist, that'd be interesting, and kind of how you found yourself in that role with particular artists.
Well, yeah, I think the role of a musical director is really ambiguous, and I think it totally depends on the project that you're working on, and also it depends on your personality and where your skill set lies. With some new artists, and certainly with some new artists that have very little budget and very little experience of playing live, because there is such a small window of opportunity for musicians, because it's a saturated market, especially if you've been picked up by a management company or a label, there is an onus on being the finished product from your first gig, or at least presenting something that is the illusion of a finished product, because ultimately that's seemingly very impressive. Now, that's not negating that you may have never gigged in your life, but the first time you get on stage, you might just have it, and your songs might stand out.
But that's a rarity, isn't it?
That's the unicorn.
Yeah.
But yeah, being a musical director has essentially, you are organised and you take responsibility for the live presentation.
Right.
With someone like Zemfira, who's a well-established artist, there is a kind of specific criteria for which she would like you to fulfill. That's a broad stroke, and you kind of have to perceive the nuances in that, and it's a constantly evolving beast. And
who has final say on something like that in that relationship then?
The artist. Yeah, absolutely. And
your role is to try and just bring that to life and try and get what's in their head into reality.
Absolutely.
Right.
You are providing a service. You know, I didn't create that music. It's not my baby.
Yeah.
But my role is to interpret what that is for the artist and try and get the presentation of it as close to their vision as possible. Now, that that's sometimes easier said than done.
And does that come into visuals as well and that kind of thing? Or is it just
No.
What do you mean by presentation then?
Presentation, so who's on stage, how it sounds. Who's on stage and how it sounds.
What about if there's particular samples or effects that are on particular, like a recording from years and years ago that have been recorded? You have to find them and tweak them, and how do you do that? If there's, say, if it's not something that comes from guitars, keys, drums world, if it's a more programmed element, yes, it's then your responsibility to go and find that. How? You don't have to give your secrets away, but just like
it's none of it's secrets. It's all information that is readily available. You just have to go looking for it. With some artists, it's a case of calling their manager, getting in touch with the label, and a lot of major labels will archive stems and mixed multis from the album sessions.
Do they charge for that service? So then, if you want to use it years later,
not as far as I know. I don't know whether the label charges the artist, but that would be really perverse.
Yeah.
And if they charged me, then I wouldn't do it.
Just find the closest one you get.
So yeah, if you're lucky, there'll be an archive of things, and they will tend to be in good. They'll be in a good format. Which makes your programming job a lot easier. But with an artist like Zemfira, there was nothing available. Because of the nature of the way it was recorded, the time, nothing was really catalogued. Records were always done with lots of different people. And, you never know where those relationships with the producers are now. So you might call a producer and say, hello, I need to get hold of this. And they'll say, cool, well, this is going to be 2 days worth of work for me. So this is paid time.
That's what I was asking.
So in that case, yes. Yeah. If it hasn't been agreed previously as part of a deal or as part of a mix deal, absolutely a producer or a mixer has the prerogative to say, this is my time.
Yeah.
So yeah, that can be a challenge.
And who owns that stem?
Oh,
it's a difficult question.
I don't really know.
It's interesting, isn't it? Like, who actually has the ownership?
Is it the label? Is it the artist?
Is it the producer?
Is it the producer? I would have thought it. You know, especially if an artist has gone to a producer without the backing of a label, or they've developed a relationship where they have their own agreement, you know, that's a very, very grey area.
Wow.
So I think as a musical director, if you have to venture into that, you have to do it very, very diplomatically. And if someone says no, then you have to be resourceful and find ways around that.
So I think someone who thrives in that role, given what you just said, has to be kind of okay with ambiguity and be okay with things being complex and uncertain and that kind of thing. And because it sounds like it's a very fluid role.
Yep.
Which is an interesting one. Okay, so you do a lot of rig building and stuff. I actually don't know exactly what that is,
right,
given the way I just described that question. So what does, I mean, is that actually the stage setup and the equipment?
It will mostly be the equipment. A lot of the time, specifically if an artist is using playback or if they are wanting to use samples that cannot be played live by the musicians,
right,
then yes, it's finding the hardware that is appropriate but also tourable and durable.
Yeah. I'd imagine quite a lot could go wrong with that kind of stuff on stage.
Yeah.
And yeah. What's the worst thing that's ever gone wrong on a gig like that?
Well, at most gigs now, certainly come a certain level, you'll run a redundant system. So you have an A/B system that will switch autonomously.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because, I mean, you can't, you know, if your whole gig or a lot of your gig sits on automation or it's playback or it's computerized and your computer goes down, well, you need a backup. But as is the nature of using technology, there's always going to be some sort of ghost in the machine, some things that you can't predict for. I mean, we had worst one we had was with Jungle, and we'd flown into Singapore. We played in London on the Thursday night, and we were due in Singapore.
Where was that?
I can't remember.
I saw you in Brixton.
Oh, in London. It was a Brixton Electric.
I was there. That was a fucking
right.
amazing gig.
It
was like one of your first gigs back, wasn't it?
It was the first gig back.
So
it was very tentative, but I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, it was amazing. It took the roof off the place. It was fucking brilliant.
I'm glad.
Yeah,
it was that. I think that was after a couple of weeks worth of rehearsals, but not quite sure what we wanted to play from the record. And
right.
So it was quite premature, I think.
You all came out in kind of these matching, like beige. Almost like prison.
Yes, there is a colour scheme.
There is a colour scheme. Yes, but it's almost like it was very beige, but it wasn't the chino look yet. It was like, you know, like the overalls that like prisoners on death row coat, but they were kind of that beige.
I wonder whether that was like the MC Overalls. Yeah, there was a company called MC Overalls who are fantastic. Yeah. I think for that gig we were mostly wearing that.
It looked good. It was a striking
cool.
image.
I mean, I think, you know, that group image is a very, very strong asset. But yes, Brixton. So we played the gig in Brixton, and then the next morning we flew to Singapore.
Yeah.
And across that weekend we did 3 days. So Singapore, Hong Kong, and Kuala Lumpur, and flew home on the Monday night. So it was pretty hardcore. And we're flying all the equipment. So 30 cases.
Yeah.
And flying, landing, going straight into a gig, which for the musicians, it's doable because you can then go and sleep for 4 hours, but for crew, it's ruthless. And because they're going straight from the airport to the venue, and as is the way with you put anything on a plane, and it's going to get bumped around, no matter how well it's protected. And just, if you're going straight into a gig, there's not really time to check things, other than, right, everything's running, this is cool. And we got maybe 5 songs in, and just white noise went across the PA, universally across all channels, which your first instinct is, the desks have crashed. But it turned out that it was coming from playback world. It was a couple of broken cables that were stopping things clocking.
Wow.
And so
how long did it take to diagnose that?
Well, so Chris Purcell, who is like absolutely Jungle's right hand man. I mean, he's now on Harry Styles. He's a very serious cat. He diagnosed it within a minute and a half, but it puts the wind up you.
What did you have to stop the song? I'm guessing?
We stopped the song and we actually left the stage.
Yeah.
And he turned it around very quickly. I mean, in that situation, God bless your crew, because they will save you.
When you finished a tour recently, you did a Twitter post saying the Jungle crew are total unsung heroes.
Oh yeah, that's 2014.
Right. Oh, is it right? Okay,
yeah.
Tell us about some of the the characters you've got in that crew and how they ensure that everything goes smoothly.
Well, with Jungle, it's a very close-knit group of people. For the most part, with a few exceptions, the crew has been involved since very early on. With Jungle, it's been a case of bringing one person at a time, and then you find yourself that you've suddenly got a full complement of crew. Antoine Richards, who's front of house, he's been with the band since absolute day one. So he is the additional member. But with them, they are your lifeline. They are the guys that make sure the show happen. They're utterly indispensable. So what was your question?
The question there was just who just to give a shout out basically to key people and how they enable everything to run so smoothly without us realising, from the audience's perspective.
I mean, it's a host of people. So you've got Antoine Richards, who's front of house, who don't know what he's doing most of the time, but I think it's quite alone. I think being front of house may be quite a lonely position because you don't get that feedback from the guys on stage. You get the feedback from the audience, but you're mixing alone, and so you don't really have any sort of validation other than people seem to enjoy it, and no news is good news, perhaps.
So, is there a communication system you have with him if you want things differently on stage? Or?
Not during the gig.
Yeah.
Originally, Antoine was doing monitors as well.
Yeah.
But then that was quickly changed to a monitor engineer just because there are so many lines on that gig.
Yeah.
And there's 7 people on stage, all requiring a different mix.
Yeah.
There's a lot of electronics. And actually, the first time we played Glastonbury, it was John Peel's stage, and my dad called me afterwards. And he was like, I was watching that live feed of you all setting up and running your monitors. And it was a case of, right, kick drum, hands in the air. Who wants more kick drum? Right, we're on stage in 10 minutes.
Wow.
Let's go. And he was like, the amount of swearing that I heard down your live, it's just like, that's very stressful with that group.
And you personally, what do you need to be in place from kind of a sound perspective, levels and balances and stuff like that when you're playing with Jungle, so you can kind of feel really confident when you start a gig?
So lots of me, more of me.
Yeah.
Kick, snare, some click, bit of tracks, vocals, or a lot of backing vocals, a lot of tom.
Because you sing backing vocals as well,
I do, yeah.
So you need to be able to pitch yourself.
Need to pitch it, and also need keys to pitch against. Kick, snare, click, vocals, lots of me.
One of the mixes that's interesting with Jungle is that so it's Josh and Tom are the front guys,
yes.
yeah. So it looks like when they sing, they're absolutely belting it out, but it comes out like really softly, like really nice soft sound. I don't know if anyone's has ever kind of pointed that out.
Yeah, I mean, vocal sound is something they really, really worked on. And that was referenced from everything that they'd done in the studio. Mm-hmm. So they came up with a vocal sound that really worked for them. So whether that was kind of multi-layered octaves with then it's like a vibrato pedal or a rotary sound.
Yeah.
And then you put Rudy and Andrea in there as well. And they're generally singing in a pretty even range. There's not a lot of kind of layered harmony. It tends to be a lot of unison, but in octaves. And then front of house, I imagine he's whacking it through some like multi-band compressors and some vibrato. And I know him and Josh, Antoine and Josh worked really hard to get that vocal sound right.
It sounds very unique. I would say, to the artist. It's like
they'd be thrilled to hear that.
It's definable by that artist. I'd say that vocal sound. Yeah,
I mean, they'd be thrilled to hear that because that's something that they really care about. So.
And they've got a bit of equipment that I've never seen, which is on so I'm using a microphone here to record this, and I've got a pop shield. And they have this kind of plastic round pop shield thing in front of their faces. What does that do?
It's an aesthetic doll. So that was something that was from the first record. Yeah. And that was... How long did that last? I don't know whether it lasted the full album campaign, but I think that was more aesthetic because anonymity was something that they wanted when they started. And the first gigs we played were played in relative darkness with a lot of smoke. And even now the shows are still pretty dark and ambient. Yeah. But yeah, the pop shields were, I think, a way of sort of hiding identity a little more. But yeah, from a discerning studio boff's perspective, the argument is, well, you don't need a pop shield for live.
Interesting.
But, it was... Yeah, it was phased out.
It was phased out. When you talked about playing gigs in different countries and going from A to B, I know that you played to Glastonbury to 10,000 people, and then the next day, I think, or within a couple of days, you went to Luxembourg and played to 50 people.
Yeah. Where did you find that?
Yeah, just key research. And so, how do you... that must kind of mess with your mind a little bit from an ego point of view, or how does that work? That must be a strange thing.
It's different from me in terms of ego because I'm not the front man. I didn't write the music. And so my job, regardless of how many people are in the audience, is to play your parts and make sure you don't mess it up. But yeah, sure. But that is the nature of gigging. Regardless of whether you're going around the world, you could be just doing a regional UK gig, and you might have an absolute slamming one in London and go to Birmingham and only sold 50 tickets. Wow. But I think once you get to that size of playing, a 10,000 cap, you've paid your dues and you've worked your way up through the ranks, that you've played so many of those shows, and that there is always a disparity. It's kind of like a sine wave. Some are great, some are not. Some are to loads of people, some are to no one. I mean, the joke that everyone makes is, those first gigs that you play, or those first festivals that you do, is basically just a dancing baby in the audience. Kind of like people sitting around the peripherals and their small children dancing. But
all been there.
Yeah. But that's like, you sort of don't trust anyone that hasn't been there, because it's just part of the process. Yeah. So no, those 50 people in Luxembourg, they might be 50 people who are mega, mega fans.
Good point.
And so they might be listening intently. They might not. They might just be there because there's something to do.
And what about keeping that energy? Because your shows are very, very energetic, and individually you're all kind of got your own thing going on. And it's you're creating an energy for the crowd. What about when you've been up since 4:30 a.m. and you're knackered and you're jet lagged and you're hungover? Where do you go to get that energy you're allowed to share?
I guess that's I mean, that's the joy of playing with 7 musicians, is that you have 6 other people on stage who have got your back, and that if you're having a crap time, for whatever reason, you can turn. In my instance, I'll turn to George, and if George's head is down, that he's having a bad one. But if he's looking up and he's smiling, that's a human connection. That makes you feel like what you're doing is worthwhile and you're actually engaging with someone. And if you're engaging on stage, then hopefully you're engaging with the audience. But yeah, inevitably there are going to be gigs where you've been up since 4 a.m. and 23 hours of your day has been travelling or waiting, and then that 1 hour is sort of the payoff. And it can feel quite deflating if that gig isn't particularly good and that 1 hour wasn't enough to sustain you. But you come up with your own methods of being able to kind of stay even by a process of elimination. I think the more you do it, the more settled you are and the more confident in yourself, the more you're able just to do it just as a natural thing.
Yeah. I think I think with gigs, it's a cycle of, for every 4 there'll be one that you think's a stinker, one think's absolutely amazing, and then 2 kind of in between those. It's just a cycle, and you just accept
and classically,
that.
everyone else on stage has gone, oh no, that was really
great,
good.
and thought shit.
So this,
or you'll think it's shit, and then someone in the audience says no, it's amazing.
I mean, I guess that's just the subjective nature of it, but just a subjective performance.
What would a young musician, or let's say a songwriting duo, learn from Josh and Tom that they might not learn observing any other songwriting duo?
Well, Tom and Josh have been friends for a long time. They communicate like brothers, and they certainly, argue like brothers, but they're able to work together in a way that it's a sort of wordless communication, because they know each other so well. With the two of them, it was a case of just actually sitting down and doing it, and continuing to do it, and persevering, and just coming up with anything. Josh had a studio in his bedroom on that first record, and and Josh works from 8 a.m. till 3 a.m. He's,
wow.
It's just what he does. That's how he makes sense of the world. Tom's slightly different. Tom might come in for then 8 hours of those days with ideas, and they'll work on it together. Or Tom's a sounding board for Josh, where Josh has been isolated. But I would say the lesson there is that just it's a support system. They trust each other implicitly, and as far as I know, they really like working together and really like each other.
From your vantage point, so like first album was like a massive success and like really critically acclaimed, and then from my research, I think this is a case that they turned down Nigel Godrich and Rick Rubin to produce the second album. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's from my research. How do you get into a mindset that doesn't like get into your head and you fuck up what you do next? I think after that first album, that success, how do you not overthink it and just stay in that moment?
That's the famed second album syndrome.
Yeah.
My perception of it is that it was very difficult for them. This record took longer than the first. I don't know. The first record was a culmination of lots of things, and then the second record is there is perhaps a need to get it out quickly to kind of keep the ball rolling, or I don't know. Suddenly, lots of things come into play that you didn't have to think about the first time round.
Such as,
well, what if no one likes it? But I think from what I gather from Josh, you end up in a very difficult position if you're second guessing your audience. You're never going to be happy. They're never going to be happy, or at least someone's not going to be happy. So just continue to make music. Just be prolific. And perhaps that is, easier said than done. But it's a case of being confident in yourself, being confident in your own voice, and confident in what you do. But that is a process, and that's why there can be big gaps in between records, because people's lives are taking hold and their own experiences in their lives are taking hold, and that where you're at might not be indicative of creating something at that time. Or if it is, it might be wildly different from your first record. But is that not the nature of art? And you put a second record out, and if it's wildly different from your first, you might lose fans, but you might gain fans. It's just that confidence in what you do. But look, I haven't done that personally, so this is secondhand. This is secondhand information just from listening. So.
How do you excel and thrive in high pressure environments? And by that I mean kind of the broadcast gigs. So I think you once said that like playing Jules was a bit of a life ambition, and you also did Jimmy Kimmel and stuff like that. Some really big gigs. How do you, aside from getting the setup that you want on stage, I do this a lot of I support a lot of people with stress management and so things around thriving, not surviving. So a lot of people, when they have a big event, they could, let's say, a job interview or having to do a presentation or something like that that's away from music for a moment. We sometimes think, I just want to get it out of the way, or I feel relieved, I just got it out, I got through it, and that's a surviving mentality. But the thriving mentality is, how can I really show off what I can do, take this opportunity, if you like. So how do you go about making sure that you're in a thriving mindset when you play these high pressure shows that if anything goes wrong, there's like millions and millions of people viewing that would observe that?
I think it's confidence from just having done it a lot. And so by the time you get into the situation where it's a high pressure environment, you have enough experience to know that, what's the worst that can happen. And if something really bad happens, well, are you accountable for it?
Yeah. So do you plan for different eventualities for things going wrong? Have you got in your head, if this goes wrong, we'll do this,
like disaster management?
Yeah.
No, not really. It's a sort of... Well, I had one the other night, which I hadn't experienced before, because running computers with Bombay, we came on for the encore, and for some reason, and I then spent a day making calls and trying to find out, what had gone on. But one of the computers had kicked out the interface, and so it wasn't seeing it. I switched on to the B rig, no problem. But as soon as I started the song, it kicked out the interface again. So I just lost everything. And that is something that I hadn't personally had to be accountable for before. And I had about a 5-second brain fart where you go, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Fortunately with that, they are such a competent group of musicians that they just played a different song, and I rebooted.
Oh, nice.
And made sure everything was on form for when we played that final song.
So had your back?
They had my back, yeah. And that is one of the greatest things about working with musicians and musicians that you like and you trust, is that whatever the scenario, you've got other people on stage who will cover you. And that's a really amazing feeling.
And I think from an audience point of view, particularly, I know you talk about Bombay there, but I definitely sense we sense that as an audience when you watch Jungle. So we just mentioned before we started recording that incredible camera shot on Jules Holland when it panned from left to right, and I think they did it at Glastonbury on the coverage there, and that it was a camera shot individually during Busy Earning, I think, where you're all doing your own thing, like you're totally in your zone. Individually, but kind of a perfect collective. And I definitely sense that is a thing coming out of this interview, that you've got to make sure you've got people there to cover your back.
It's feeling unionised.
Yeah, nice.
It's being around people that support you, both on stage and off stage. Because you live in such close quarters, I think you'd have a very, very hard time touring and working together if there wasn't that. If people weren't unionised. Yeah.
What's the touring pressures that we don't see?
Living on a tour bus with 16 people.
Yeah.
Flying around the world, I'd say 85% in economy. The time away. I think with a band like Jungle, where they're at in terms of their career as well as personally, they can dedicate 100%, or at least 99.9% of their lives to that cause. And as is the nature of working with an artist or a group like that, is that then you are expected to do the same. And so, these last 2 years, that has been the entire focus of my life. And that can be detrimental, but it's also a choice.
Yeah.
Didn't have to be there, didn't have to do it, I wanted to be. But it certainly can put a strain on your relationships at home. It's slightly different for me because I've been single for the entire campaign. But yeah, if you've got a partner and if you've got kids or if you've got something going on with your family and friends, it can feel incredibly isolating because you're not there. And, you know, even with technology, which makes things a lot easier to communicate, physical distance absolutely plays a part. And also, when you're on a roll or you're 8 weeks deep in America and you're playing 6 shows a week, 5 or 6 shows a week, and you feel like a linchpin, and it's intense and you live in a bubble, it can make it very, very difficult to go, I've got to go, I've got to leave. But I think that's something that you learn, and with the really important things is going, this is a way of life, but this is also a job, and so I've got to go. I'm sorry, I've got to take a sick day, I've got to take a week out, because your well-being is, you know, without that you're not able to function properly. And so, but that can be a really grey area when you're on deep into a tour, especially, you know, an 8-week American tour, 1 day off, and then maybe a 6-week European tour.
It's interesting you use the word isolation and well-being there, because they're two very linked things. Anyone brings up the isolation word, and straight away there's like alarm bells around well-being. So if you're doing that tour for 2 years, fucking hell, man, that's intense, you know. So it's good to have a break from it. And
it is, yeah. I mean, you know, we did a lot. I think we did 210 gigs. That's a lot. That's a lot of time. That's a lot of traveling. And actually to suddenly step outside of that is now a relief. You know, it might not have been a year ago because you were on a roll, but now, you know, in those last 6 to 8 months of a tour, especially a 2-year tour, you see people pushing and pulling as like there is something in their lives that they are wanting to pursue. The more time goes on, the harder it is to unionize people because around one singular cause, because everyone has their own prerogative. And that can create tensions. That can also create a lot of relief. But yeah, it's a long time, and your mental health can really suffer, especially if you are on a mental schedule and you're flying around the world and you're doing it in economy, and then you're on buses where it's full band and crew and there's no space. And add to that, you're doing room shares, which is a lot, I mean, I would say 80% unusual on a lot of gigs, but with Jungle for the most part we'll room share. It's very difficult to find your own space. So you have to work out a way of getting there. But yeah, that is difficult.
If you were to embark on another 2-year tour, what should change in the way things work out?
Balance. The time away.
So shorter chunks and coming home and that kind of thing?
Yeah.
Going back,
yeah.
Balance of
home and away.
Yeah.
Home and away.
Each day, yeah.
Just for me personally, where I'm at in my life, I wouldn't want to commit to another 2 years now of being away, because there's other things that I want to do. But with a band like Bombay Bicycle Club, they all, because they haven't been doing this for 5 years, they all went and lived and did this, you know. Jamie went to university for 4 years, the other guys made records, Seren went and played with lots of different artists. Their lives have moved on, their relationships have moved on, some of them are married. You know, different parts of their lives are taking precedent, and so
that's shaping their
their choices, and that's their choice as how they run their group and their business as to how they want to do that. But, you know, that's not necessarily something that they did 4 or 5 years ago. I think that comes with time. And if you're lucky enough that you can do a worldwide touring schedule and it lasts 2 years, there is an amount of paying your dues with that, building your fan base, and then hopefully being able to not dictate, but just have a little more control over the next time round. Where you go, okay, we don't have to do 6 gigs a week. We could do 4, or we could do 3, and we still be able to employ everyone. We still be able to have the full production, but we're playing bigger slots. We're playing to more people. But you have to earn that, or at least in the groups that I've worked with, it's building from the ground up.
So maybe it's that 2 years that you just did was the hard yards that you will be able to play bigger venues and play fewer gigs.
I would like to hope so, because I don't think I don't want to live like that again, or at least anytime soon. I don't mean that in a negative way, and that's not me trying to put a downer on it. It's just, it's a very singular mindset, and it's perhaps selfish in a way, but I'm at a point in my life where you can do that, because other than family and friends and my community, don't have a tremendous amount of responsibility outside of myself. I don't have kids. I'm not financially dependent, or people aren't financially dependent on me. Yeah. So you can sort of disappear for 2 years.
Who do you become on stage that you aren't so much off stage? So how does Fraser on stage differ from Fraser off stage?
I don't really know, because with who I work with, you don't really have to be a character, because no one's looking to you for that. I'm not in the bands that I work with. I'm not on the front line. People don't look to me to carry the image or the aesthetic or their belief of what a group is. So I feel very much like myself on stage.
Great stuff. So we're getting to the end of this decade. We're only 2 months away from the end of this decade, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, the end of my 20s.
Yeah. So it's interesting. It's because I've got 2 questions here. So firstly, where were you at the start of this decade in your life? Kind of reflecting onto where you are now, and what do you think this decade will be remembered for? So you've got quite a strong identity, I'd say, post 50. So the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, noughties, 2000, up until 2010 has got quite a strong identity. Where were you at the beginning of this decade, and what do you think this decade will be remembered for?
I was 20, and I think I was 6 months out of working my last really shit job. No, I worked some shit jobs since then, but
happy to share any of those? No, okay, fine.
Worked in bars, worked in restaurants, worked in shops. Yeah. Some of them much better than others. One I got fired from.
What for?
I got fired from a pub. So I was 20. I was playing in a band called Born Blonde, which was with Josh and Tom from Jungle, and George, the drummer from Jungle.
Wow.
And we had just signed a deal. And we were working with Owen Morris.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, right, nice, yeah.
We made an album with Owen.
Did you?
Yeah.
Where was that, in Wales?
We did lots of places.
Right, okay.
It was a lot of fun. It was very expensive. We did it at Real World,
right?
For the most part, we did 2 tracking sessions, one at Rack and one at Real World.
Yeah,
but
Rack's great. I was at Rack recently.
It's very cool. Yeah. We had a lot of fun there.
Right.
I mean, all the stories are true about it, so it's So we were just doing that. We were making an album that never came out, and it was so much fun.
Does it sit anywhere? Is there?
It sits on everyone's iTunes, and I don't think it ever made it to Spotify. It was all very dysfunctional. But it was really good fun, and I bought a couple of nice guitars at the time, which I then had to sell like 2 years later.
Nice. So that's where you were 10 years ago, I think, where you are now. So it's kind of nice that the band were unsigned at the time, or not as Jungle, but like members.
There's a sort of, I think hindsight is always a wonderful thing where you can kind of give everything a reason or tie things off neatly and harmoniously. But You asked about like a social thing. What will it be?
Yeah, what do you think this
for?
decade will be easily summarised as, or?
Oh man, my social commentary is so bad. I don't know.
What about musically then? So each of those decades I mentioned have got quite a strong identity for music, I would say.
I
So
think but this is perhaps a decade where bands and groups have become far more autonomous, in that rather than major labels dictating and funding what bands do and feeling like you have a small window of opportunity and a lot of money hanging over your head, bands are now running themselves as their own businesses, and with companies like Caroline and Cobalt who provide label services, groups have a lot more autonomy. And so I think it's a decade where a lot of power has been put back in the hands of the musicians and their teams to create something themselves and have more control over it, certainly.
out of about 70 episodes of the podcast, that's one of the best answers we've ever had.
Woo!
That's a fucking great answer.
All right.
What if you could if you could attend one gig you've played in the audience, what would it be?
Oh,
if you
it has
go
to
back,
be this year, 100%.
Would it be?
100%.
Why?
Because all my mates were there.
Nice.
All my mates were there. It was a billing where there weren't any clashes, other than I think the Charlatans were on the main stage,
Yeah.
so the draw was really high.
So you were on the other stage.
We were on West Holt's.
Oh yeah.
So
I watched it,
three stages down, but there was no one on the other stage at that time, and it was just Charlatans on the main. I think it was Charlatans on the main stage, and so the passing traffic to that stage was just brilliant, and it was the culmination of 2 years worth of touring and going, this is as good as it's going to get on this campaign. We're at our peak, and I would have wanted to be in. I was like, God, that's so like narcissistic, isn't it? Being like, oh, I would like to be in the audience at my own gig.
No. That's the question I asked. So that's fine. And we asked that question to a lot of people. So don't be like,
That just because the energy was right, and all of my mates were there, and the sun was shining, and it was just. It just felt like an evening of real joy, like pure joy. You know, hadn't been drinking. I don't do drugs. It was just like the purest form of joy, and yeah, I would have liked to have that.
what was the last song that made you choke up?
Oh, well, other than like being a bit pissed and being on a plane and watching Marley and me. Sorry, there is my granddad wrote a song called "The Joy of Living," which is, as the title says, the joy of living, and that makes me choke up.
Was it released? Was it in what format have you heard it?
Yeah, it's very, very much released, but recording maybe from the late 80s.
Oh, okay.
That I think. I'm a very sensitive young man.
What's the most important piece of memorabilia, music-wise, that you have? So if you've got something in your home and the place was burning down and all kind of, your loved ones were out the way, what was the key thing that you pick up?
My Telecaster.
Yeah, tell us about your relationship with that Telecaster.
I bought that when I was 17.
Right.
I just learned to drive, and me, my brother and my sister shared a 1 litre Nissan Micra, and I had a Saturday job and a bit of savings, and I had 600 quid. I was like, right, I could definitely get a nice guitar for that.
What year was it made, do you know?
It's not an old one.
Okay.
It's custom shop.
I've got a 74 over there. Just in one of the...
Very nice.
I'll show you afterwards, yeah.
And I worked in a guitar shop. That was my first job.
Yeah.
And all the guitars were like well out of my reach, and I was on eBay, and this fella was selling. I don't think he knew what he had, and he was selling it for 450 quid. So I got straight him an SM Micra and hurled it up the motorway at 55 miles an hour to the back of a hairdresser's. Where this guy just wanted 450 quid cash. Said, went to my checkings account, got it out, gave him the money, just about afforded the petrol back, and that guitar has been with me since, and is my number one. So that would be my memorabilia, but only because it's been with me on every gig, and I put the miles on it. So yeah, that or one of my dad's guitars.
Right.
So, yeah.
Nice. Now that you got to kind of this level, what's your motivation next? What motivates you now?
To try and stay at this level.
Yeah, good.
To try and stay financially independent.
That's what Alex Ferguson used to say, the Man United manager. It's one thing getting to that level, but then the hardest thing is maintaining it. So,
I think because of the nature of what we do, it would be a very foolish thing to say, well, now I'm just going to play arenas, because that's totally unrealistic. I think it is to have the privilege to be able to call this my full-time occupation.
Yeah.
And unfortunately that has been for the last 5 years, but to continue that, to be as diverse in what you do, because I think certainly in some aspects of music now, to stay employed, you have to be malleable, and you have to be able to cover lots of bases and stay ahead of what's kind of happening, or at least where I would like to be.
Yeah.
But I'm not a kind of a pure musician. I never did that time of spending 10 hours a day sitting in my room shredding, and I put in the time in a different way. And so,
which was
going like playing in bands.
Yeah.
So
getting out there, so still playing a lot, but getting out there, but
getting out there, and just hanging out, and kind of learning things by osmosis, and listening to other people playing, and trying to replicate that. But really just sitting and playing with music. When I first moved out of home, I lived in a house full of musicians, and we were always playing in each other's bands. And
nice.
Look, don't get me wrong, I certainly put in the time when it comes to learning, but I didn't. And there's certainly a flaw in my knowledge because of this, which has been exposed a number of times, that not doing those 8 to 10 hours a day of shredding for 4 to 5 years has meant that I am certainly slower on some things. But then my knowledge is, I've gained it elsewhere.
Yeah.
But yeah, there is certainly things that I need to work on, which I will continue to do.
What's the best bit of advice someone's given you?
Stick at it, and that if you're going through a hard time and music might be giving you the thing that you need emotionally, but it's not necessarily giving it to you financially, if you decide to take up something else because you need to for your own well-being, you never stop being a musician. It never leaves you. It's just at that moment in time, it wasn't able to fulfill the things that you needed. But you never stop being a musician, and music will always be able to provide something to you emotionally, whether that's joy, whether that's sorrow. It tunes into a part of you which I don't think is, well, I personally feel that I'm not really able to access that part of myself outside of music, but you never stop being a musician, yeah. Is that advice?
That is incredible answer to that question. That is a beautiful answer. If you were to find out the world ended tomorrow, what would be your biggest regret? Musically.
Yeah.
Like, we'll be like, oh fuck, I never got around to that. What would that be?
Fuck, I never got around to that. Writing. Yeah. Written songs that people will sing back to you. Yeah, I've never done that.
So there's a learning in that.
Hell yeah.
So
yeah.
that's next step.
Yeah, my dad's always banging on at me about that. It's like, that's great that you're doing all this, but if you should be writing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be my biggest regret.
What's stopping you at the moment, other than time away?
Pride.
Pride, yeah.
And fear as well.
Yeah. Fear of what?
Failure or things not being very good. I think because I spent 10 years of my life getting to a certain point, providing a certain service.
It's starting again almost.
It's starting again, but you know what? You'll always be. This is me just giving myself a life lessons. Oh, you really should be doing this. Yeah, that would be my biggest regret: not spending more time writing, and not developing a discipline of it, because it's not. There are things that don't really come very naturally to me. A lot of things I actually have to really sit down and hammer it out and be disciplined about it. I make sense of the world through certain things in music, but I have to, I really have to work at it. It's not something that where I'll sit in my room for 10 hours and write.
Yet. You haven't done it yet.
Watch this space.
And what's one of the most surreal experiences you've had on tour? Any interesting run-ins with people, or what's the kind of thing that you might tell your grandchildren to go, wow, I can't believe that once happened?
Yeah. There's a couple, but I don't think I'll be able to say. Yeah, one particular period of when we were it was in Born Blonde with Josh and Tom and George, and a guy called Arthur Delaney, who's now in a band called Halos.
Right.
But we had a period of 2 years that were particularly, 21, 22, that happened to coincide with some very big rock stars. Yes.
Without naming them, can you say what happened?
No, it was great. Surreal experience. I met David Gilmour when I was 16. I say meet. I sort of stumbled some words and then walked off. But yeah, lots of surreal things. Kind of meeting people. I mean, the Russian stuff was really surreal with Zemfira because she is an absolute megastar. I mean, does
Putin go to her gigs and stuff like that? Because he's turned up at McCartney gigs and stuff.
No, it's but it's certainly there is certainly a 1% that surrounds that. Actually,
how do you mean by that? 1%?
Well, I think to be that successful and that big in Russia, well, first of all, you have to be apolitical.
Yeah.
You're never going to get to be that big unless you're state endorsed.
Yeah.
And the way things run, I think financially, is wildly different from how they do in regulated environments like the UK, Europe, America, Japan. It's I think there's I don't know for sure, but I think there is an idea of having a patron. And so there are people that are able to support you, provide the infrastructure for your records and live shows. And that is certainly, to have that financial wealth, you're in the 1%. So actually, a real surreal time was Zemfira's birthday. She invited us on a very large yacht that was sailing through Moscow for the evening. And I remember it's like 11 at night. I was so pissed because it was great with champagne.
Yeah, nice.
But I was up the front of the yacht smoking a cigarette and eating caviar and drinking champagne, and I just went, yeah, this is fucking great. and then of course the end of the tour and it all ends and then you go back home. But yeah, that was a moment I just went, yeah, that's fucking great.
Awesome. And a question, we'll begin to wrap up. So a question we ask every person who appears on the StageLeft Podcast is, what fears do you have for the music industry if any, and how might those fears be addressed?
I worry that touring won't be sustainable for bands, but that your music will only be able to be heard in a digital format, which perhaps we might get to the stage where people's pool of music that they listen to is much, much smaller because you're on a subscription service that may have algorithms that mean that you're only listening to a particular narrow field. And so exposure, even though your music being online has an audience, way beyond what you perhaps could imagine, it might also be such a small demographic of listeners, and that you might not be able to sustain yourself touring, and so there's no human experience of it. People won't be able to come and see you live, which is such a gratifying experience to go and see a band of you that you love. It's theatre. It transports you out of your everyday life. And I think live performance is a really, really unique thing. And with Brexit perhaps, and the expense of touring even as far as Europe is out of reach, or may become more out of reach to people. And I think that's really negative, because there's so much to be gained as a human experience from going to a gig. Yeah.
And what's next for you? What's on the horizon? What you got coming up?
I've got a couple of weeks off.
Good.
And then going out for a week run with Bombay Bicycle Club to do their I Had the Blues run, which is their first album,
Nice.
sort of anniversary shows.
Where's that? UK based only?
Yeah,
Nice.
So regional, so Monday through to Friday, just 1 week. And then we do a week in Asia. And then, it's kind of just quiet over Christmas. And then January, a full touring schedule starts until September. So
With
Bombay Bicycle Club.
Bombay,
Which will be, I think, mostly worldwide, I think. I haven't seen a full schedule yet. But I'm sort of taking this time now just to get settled back into like being at home and sorting my life out.
Good.
Yeah, so, yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you for your candid answers and your honesty and your wisdom and your insight. You provided loads of kind of great advice to young musicians listening to this. Good luck with the tours coming up, and also get writing. We want to hear that stuff. Get writing, get through it. Battle through that anxiety towards that, because we all get that in lots of different things. So go for it, and we hope you have enjoyed appearing on the Stage Left podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure.
Record 30, 40, 50 vocals, and then you go home.
For more episodes featuring Tony Visconti on recording David Bowie's Black Star, we recorded that just days before Bowie passed. Jamie Moses on 10 Years in Queen. We got Gem Archer from Noel Gallagher's High Flying Birds and Oasis. Russ Pritchard from the same band too. Richard Fortes of Guns N' Roses. Clive Deamer of Radiohead. Billy Burnett of Fleetwood Mac, and many, many more, including Stuart Lee. Go to thestageleftpodcast.com. Follow us on Twitter at the Stage Left Pod. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/StageLeftPodcast. Go to our Instagram page, search for the Stage Left Podcast on there. Stage Left is all one word, where you'll see photos of all the behind the scenes shows. Get in touch with us as well. Drop us an email to simo.cs@gmail.com. So that's simmo.cs@gmail.com, where we can give you some details about our private dinner in our lounge in London with Mo Pleasure coming up on the 22nd of December. Thanks for listening.